Think about your own grandparents for a second. Picture their faces, the way they speak, the little things they do for you. A grandmother isn't just a word, it's a whole emotion, a feeling of absolute unconditional warmth. Today, we're exploring a deeply moving true story that captures this universal bond just perfectly. Okay, let's dive right into this explainer of Khushwant Singh's classic story, The Portrait of a Lady. We're going to break down the entire chapter today, making it completely unforgettable for you, which is absolutely crucial if you're gearing up for an exam. Here's how we're breaking it down today. We'll start with some essential chapter vocabulary, then move chronologically through the three key phases of their relationship: village friendship, the city turning point, and distance and acceptance. Finally, we'll wrap up with a final farewell. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Essential Chapter Vocabulary. If you want to absolutely nail your exam questions, mastering a few specific English terms is a real game changer. First up is stale. You know when something is no longer fresh, maybe a bit hard or dry? Well, in the context of our story, it refers to those day-old dry flatbreads that the grandmother lovingly carried with her to feed the village street dogs. Next, we've got rosary. This is essentially a string of beads used for keeping count in prayers. You are going to see this word a lot, mostly because the grandmother was literally always holding hers, moving the beads through her fingers as she silently prayed all day long. Then there's distressed, which means suffering from anxiety, sorrow, or being deeply upset. Keep this one in your back pocket, because it perfectly captures how she feels later on when she finds out about the curriculum at her grandson's new city school. And finally, chirruping. This is that series of short, high-pitched sounds made by small birds. It perfectly describes the beautiful, lively noise of the sparrows she feeds in the afternoons, which actually becomes a huge part of her later life. So, looking at Khushwant Singh's entire life journey with his grandmother, we can actually map it out into 5 clear stages: childhood in the village, adolescence at the city school, early adulthood at university, his 5 years abroad, and finally the return. Now, exam questions almost always zero in on those first 3 phases. Let's see exactly how their relationship evolved through them. Which brings us to Section 2, Phase 1, Village Friendship. Now, what's really interesting here is that during his childhood, the author and his grandmother weren't just family. They were like best friends. Let's picture her for a second. She had an old, deeply wrinkled face. She was short, a bit stout, and walked with this slightly bent posture, keeping one hand resting on her waist just to keep her balance. She was always dressed in crisp, spotless white clothes, constantly telling the beads of her rosary. In fact, to the young author, she seemed so incredibly old that it was hard for him to believe she had ever been young, or no way, that she ever even had a husband. She was just his timeless grandmother. Their lives in the village were completely intertwined. It was like clockwork. She'd wake him up, get him ready, carefully pack his wooden slate, and they'd walk together to the temple school. And while he sat on the veranda singing the alphabet and morning prayers with the other kids, she was right there, sitting inside the temple, peacefully reading scriptures. And the best part? On their way home, they shared this beautiful routine of feeding those stale flatbreads we talked about to the street dogs. It was really a time of pure, unbroken connection. But things shift in Section 3, Phase 2, the city turning point. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive turning point in their relationship. Everything changes when the author's parents call them to live in the city. Back in the village, education was tied directly to the temple, and they walked side by side everywhere. But in the city, the author starts going to an English medium school on a motor bus. No more walking together. Plus, the city streets didn't have any dogs to feed, so she started feeding sparrows in the courtyard instead. You can really start to see the physical and emotional distance creeping in. Now, pay attention, because this triad right here is an absolute gold mine for your exam prep. There were 3 specific reasons why the new city school made her so incredibly distressed. Number 1, the English and science syllabus. She couldn't understand it, which meant she couldn't help him study anymore. Number 2, she was deeply upset that there were 0 teachings about God or the scriptures. And number 3, she was absolutely horrified by his music lessons. To her, music was a lewd and definitely not meant for gentlefolk. This modern curriculum really caused a silent, expanding rift between them. Moving into Section 4, Phase 3, Distance and Acceptance. The gap between them widens even further as the author grows up. Once he enters university, he gets his own room. And just like that, the common link of their friendship completely snaps. This brings us to another super exam-friendly triad: how she adapted to this sudden isolation. Well, she didn't complain. Actually, she quietly accepted her loneliness. She spent her days sitting at her spinning wheel, constantly reciting prayers and telling her rosary. Her only real joy, like the happiest half hour of her entire day, was feeding those chirping sparrows in the afternoon. The physical distance hits its absolute peak when the author decides to go abroad for 5 whole years to study. I mean, 5 years. He fully expected her to be deeply sentimental and teary at the railway station. But actually, scratch that, she showed absolute stoicism, no visible emotion at all. She just kept up her silent prayers, told her beads, and gently kissed his forehead as a silent, incredibly powerful farewell. Which leads us to our final chapter, Section 5, The Final Farewell. So, we've reached the emotional climax of the story. After 5 long years, the author finally comes home. And who's right there at the station to welcome him? His grandmother, looking exactly the same. But the very next morning, she falls ill. Now, the doctor gives this super casual medical diagnosis, saying it's a mild fever, it will pass. But the grandmother? Her deep spiritual intuition tells her something entirely different. She looks right at her family and declares, clear as day, my end is near. Realizing she only had a few hours left, she completely refused to waste her final moments chatting with anyone. Instead, she chose to lie peacefully in her bed, continuously praying and telling her beads. And she did this right up until, suddenly, her lips stopped moving and the rosary slipped from her lifeless fingers. And that leaves us with this incredibly poignant final image. As she lay there, literally thousands of sparrows flew in and sat around her body. But here's the thing. There was no chirping. None. They sat in absolute pin-drop silence. When the author's mother threw breadcrumbs out to them, just out of habit, the birds refused to eat a single piece. And when her body was finally carried away, they simply flew away quietly. It's like even nature itself was mourning her passing. It really makes you wonder, right? If a simple, quiet life of devotion can leave such a profound impact on everything around it, how often do we overlook the silent pillars in our own modern lives? Think about it. And what other untold generational stories are hiding in Khushwant Singh's other writings? Go ahead, read the text again and see what subtle details you might notice this time around.